Freud thinks women don't have superegos at all? Wow.
I mean, I don't know that.
He didn't believe like women had sort of an internal moral structure, like they required like external guidance to like behave properly or something. Whereas men did have like an internal conscience that could guide their behavior even in the absence of sort of a legal structure.
So it's like women are like children in that. We are back for another episode of Open Therapy. I'm here with Dr. Rob Henderson and Dr. Andrew Hart. And I am Miss Megan Doe. Not even Ms. I identify as a Miss forever. Anyway, we're here to talk about a number of things, including your honorifics. But how are you guys doing today? How's your week been? Your respective weeks?
I'm boiling.
Yeah.
You're boiling?
Yeah, it hits 60 degrees in New York, and my apartment is always like the heat's on full blast, like it's winter. And so it's probably like I have all my windows open. I run my air conditioner at night because it's 60 degrees outside, but in the building, if I don't do that, it'll be 80.
Yeah, well.
I don't know what your building's like, Rob, but mine is so hot.
It's not hot, but it's approaching too warm. Yeah, it happened overnight. It was cold 3 days ago, and now it's suddenly warm. But it's supposedly going to rain again and possibly snow in a few days. So we're in a weird period of sort of spring winter transition.
Yeah, and I live right by Gracie Mansion. Not right by. I live several blocks away, but I live close to it. And they're
You saw them light the fuse?
The whole
He oversaw it. What do you mean?
The park has been closed like 4 or 5 times in the last 5 days for bombs.
Yeah.
There's a different bomb. I mean, I've only seen a couple of them in the news. There's been way more than I feel like I've only heard really about one that was in the news very much. But there were like a ton of bombs. So that's kind of the other thing.
God.
And these are like Looney Tunes looking bombs. Like they're like little, like with the fuse attached, and you light it, and then it starts to spark. Yeah. Did you see the picture? Yeah, I think I saw it. I think it was in the New York Times. The photo of the guy who had the bomb and he was about to throw it, and it looked like something the coyote was going to throw at the Roadrunner in the Looney Tunes car. Like, do they still like have bombs like that? But that was what they.
That's
they
3D printing for you. Tell you that.
Yeah, no, that was Claude helped him make that.
Yeah.
Step-by-step instructions. How do I make a Wile E. Coyote style?
Yeah, you're better off with a slingshot. Yeah. Anyway, all right. Well, we're going to talk about a number of things today, including the superego. Why are we talking about that? What's so important about the superego? I have some thoughts, but I'm just a miss. I'm just an uninformed little missy here. What did the doctors have to say about it?
I think it's so the superego is like related to morality. So it's everything that has to do with ideals and inhibitions and shame and guilt and right and wrong and that moral sense. And it's interesting, like I think our historical moment is very interesting because it seems really chaotic in terms of superego issues where we're hyper moral about some issues, extremely harsh and unforgiving and judgmental about certain things, and incredibly permissive and about other things. And there's a kind of instability, and we're not on the same page about what, like people feel oppositely about what we should be permissive versus judgmental about. And there's a way that we're really uncomfortable as a society with morality and setting moral limits. I think parents are uncomfortable with it a lot. Authority figures are sometimes uncomfortable with it. And then on the other hand, we have this incredibly censorious kind of puritanical strain in our culture that's like so judgmental. So that was kind of the impetus for an article I wrote a couple of years ago about just superego issues nationally and just trying to think about what's happening and how could we understand this kind of like chaos around morality.
Yeah, I liked in your piece, Andrew, that you discuss early on the tripartite structure of the mind, right? So maybe for listeners, right, you have the superego, the ego, and the id. And so the ego is kind of the seat of the self, right? And then you have the superego, which is the sort of moralizing. It's sometimes equated with the conscience. And then the id, which is sort of your simmering, dark, often disavowed desires. And so you're sort of, I guess, what's trying to manage these two competing forces in your life. Now, I have a question, Andrew, because I vaguely recall reading somewhere, this is about the superego, that, okay, so I guess, like, often the id is characterized as being very, like, primitive. And, you know, it's like, oh, I want food, I want water, I want sex, I want this, just sort of like the pleasure principle idea of just sort of getting you to act on these animalistic urges. But I vaguely recall reading that the people think of the superego as like being this smart, intelligent, moral philosopher who's trying to guide you to the right thing. But actually, the superego is like equally stupid to the id, where it's like, oh, that's disgusting. Don't do that. Like, stop looking at her. Stop craving the cheesecake. Stop doing this. Like, be a good person. You're awful. Why would you want that? Is that like a
Wait, what's wrong with that?
Exactly.
That's my internal monologue.
It's totally, the superego can be totally not rational. And the
Okay.
types of things that we feel guilty about or shame about can be totally divorced from what we actually believe is morality, and I think often are. And even the word, what I was told in grad school, I haven't fact checked this, but that the word shrink comes from shrinking the superego. That the main job of the therapist was to kind of tame the superego, that so much pathology, so much mental illness is caused by unbalanced and overreactive superegos, that was a key aim of the therapy, was to kind of get the over judgmental or inhibitory superego curled back. And you can even see how people who are super dysregulated and they seem to have no inhibitions or shame, it's still kind of a superego issue in a lot of ways. Like they can't engage with morality at all or something, or inhibitions at all. Versus people where it's like overly harsh, and like getting to that balanced place is often like a central part of therapy.
So are they supposed to be in balance, the id, the ego, and the superego? I mean, is that the goal, or are they some of them good and some of them bad? I mean, they just all seem very problematic, frankly.
Each one, what's
each of these, the id, the ego, the superego, they've all got things going against them.
And it's kind
what's
of
going for them.
It's kind of a pessimistic like worldview. Like there is this sense that you have these sexual and aggressive desires that can't all be fulfilled. That's not great. You've got all these moral inhibitions. Those aren't fun either. And you're trying to like maintain yourself amidst them, which is hard and ultimately not gratifying either. And there is this kind of like, I think frankly, like kind of pessimistic view of life as being unsatisfying that might be kind of baked into it. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, you don't want to have no superego. You don't want to have a too harsh superego. You want to have something that's reality-based and balanced. And you do need inhibitions. You do need morality. You do need shame and guilt sometimes. You do need ideals and things. Like, they're not pointless. But you want them to be grounded in reality and not too excessive.
I think of these from an evolutionary perspective. Use the reductive view of evolution as survival and reproduction. And I think of the superego as something like promoting survival, and the id as more so attempting to promote reproduction. So if the id is about, sex, and it's about, these very base appetites and desires, which are necessary to, pass your genes on. And then the superego is about sort of going about that in a way that doesn't get you killed. Smoothing over social relationships and following the rules and trying to, I guess, fulfill those base desires in a way that's sort of socially acceptable, such that you don't get ostracized or imprisoned or killed or something along the way. But I think, like, because I've had this thought too, Megan, of like, okay, so it's a very interesting framework, but then like, what does it do? What's it for? Like, why is it so important for our psyche to be balanced? Why do we have a superego and an id? And, you know, for me as a sort of an evolutionary minded psychologist, I think like it's got to be tied something to do with ensuring we stay alive, and then ensuring that we attract a partner and have sex and pass on our genes.
Yeah, and I think as a therapist, just having more models for what could be going on with somebody is just, you know, gold, because you get a sense of like, not everybody, I don't think this framework is going to really be perfect for everyone by any means, but there are people where the moral concerns are so dominant, especially depression and anxiety, where, and you can, I think in terms of like the over me is really the German word. It's like there's the me, the over me, and the it, which is the
Über-Ich.
The Über-Ich. But people experience it.
The Uber Eats?
Über-Ich.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the German.
Uber Eats is an id, I think. If you're really going to not regulate. I just, whatever, it's right there in front of you. Okay. Wait, say more about that. Okay.
I do think that people experience it physically often as like a force bearing down on their bodies, like their neck, their shoulders, their gut, their back. People actually do feel that pressure weighing on them. It's like there's a reason why it's like over. I think there's something that's like really hits the experience of it, and are in their head all the time with criticisms and inhibitions, and it can totally be. I mean, it's not so rare for that to be a dominant focus of therapy.
And does that come chiefly through nurture, through your upbringing, or is this hardwired?
Oh, I think Rob would. I mean, I guess it's probably both, but especially like I kind of think like maybe it's slightly different thing, but like your self-talk, people's self-talk, when it is super abusive, which it is for some people, it's not rare that what that really abusive voice is saying really mirrors what a close person in your life said. A parent, a spouse, other influential people, that it kind of, you bought into it somehow and internalized it, and then it kind of takes on a life of its own. So It does have this, but there's probably people that have a propensity for that versus others.
Well, I think we have, sort of the innate structure in place for, one way to think is like a conscience of, thinking about right and wrong. We're prepared innately to have that, that mechanism in our mind shaped by culture, by parents, by the broader society of what's right and wrong. But then, there probably are people who, experience it more harshly or judge themselves in a more severe way than others, but most people to varying degrees, I think, they have the capacity for guilt, for shame, for wanting to do the right thing, not wanting to betray the people they care about, not wanting others to think badly of them. That's like one of the most interesting findings in social psychology, is that just about everyone thinks of themselves as a good person, regardless of whatever empirical evidence might contradict that. There was a funny study of British prison inmates years ago, where these researchers asked these inmates, to rate themselves relative to the average member of broader society. Are you, they rate their sort of morals and their values and their conduct. And prison inmates overwhelmingly rated themselves as above average on all of these categories, except for one, which was one they rated themselves as exactly average, which was law-abidingness. And they're in prison, right? And so, other criminologists and in qualitative reports will talk about like what these criminals say to them, and they'll say like, I think of myself as a good person. If I thought of myself as a bad person, it would be hard to live with myself. others, when they interview like violent psychopaths, even they'll have some like strange moralistic justification. I remember reading one criminologist interviewing a psychopath who had killed someone, and so the criminologist asked something like, "Why did you robbed this guy and then you killed him? Why not just rob him?" And the psychopath said something like, "Well, I had to teach him a lesson. He learns a valuable lesson about life. It's just like basically watch your back." And the thing is, he's dead. So what lesson could he have possibly learned? But in his mind, he taught this guy a lesson. It was something honorable that he did for this gentleman who he killed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, psychopaths are there's a lot of psychopaths in prison, and they have.
But even they are not like, oh, you like fuck morality, like I do what I want. Even they have to have some justification and view of themselves as a good person. Like they have a warped superego or something, but they still need to justify their actions in a way that this has some moral sheen.
Right. And I guess compared to everybody else in prison, they would be average, right?
Yeah. Well, the question was compared to people in the broader society.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but in their mind, either they themselves are innocent or everyone's a criminal and they're just the ones who happen to get caught.
Yeah.
But the people who I would think would rate themselves as not as good people would be people who are depressed. Like that would be the people which has probably nothing to do with how moral they are, or maybe they're more likely to be moral because they're worried about it. But depressed people, I don't know if anybody's, but I would guess that they would rate themselves as less good, maybe, or maybe not even in that context.
I mean, I'm interested in this idea of the superego as a weird kind of form of, if not ego itself, but maybe id. So using myself, for example, I have a very punishing internal monologue, and it's pretty much all the time, and it's kind of the default, and it's interesting. Like, yes, it probably comes from some kind of parent or early caregiver, but then of course what we do is then we are attracted to people in our lives who are saying the same thing, right? So like we tend to kind of surround ourselves with influential figures over the course of a lifetime who have kind of reinforced those ideas. But be that as it may, I have noticed in myself that when I have this kind of loop of negative thoughts, it almost feels like a release. Like there's something weirdly cathartic about it. I have likened it to sort of mental cutting. It's like a form of self-harm. That's like an internal verbiage. And it feels almost like some kind of tension release.
Yeah.
So what do you make of that?
Freud thought about depression that it was like basically anger turned inward that would then be experiences guilt or depression. And so I think a lot of people that are very harsh with themselves are angry, but for whatever reason the anger is saying like fuck you or I am upset with you. They can't do that. And so it's in response, like even if you look at the sequence of events, it's after someone else is really mean to them, that's when they beat themselves up the most. It's like the anger is channeled into this outlet because that's the only place where they feel like it can go. Yeah, that it's like, but yeah, it does kind of. I think there's another thing though that's like maybe more foundational that when what you said about like being attracted to people who mirror that. People are so attached to their inner, distorted, harsh, weird self-talk. They're so attached to it. It's interesting why people sometimes they buy into it. They think it's going to make them better. They think it's going to help them somehow. But even if they recognize that it doesn't, it's like, this hurts my performance. It hurts my relationships. It makes me miserable. It's not true. Most things it says aren't true. They're just like way too distorted or extreme. But then it's like, even if they recognize that, they still have a hard time letting go of it, because it's like, that's how, it's like they get a sense of, this is who I am. They feel authentic, or there's a loneliness to letting it go or something. Like, it's hard to let it go, even though there's something attractive about it to people.
Well,
Yeah, I remember reading that in, was it Morning and Melancholia, the essay where he talks about depression as sort of like this form of retaliation where, yeah, you can't hurt the person who's hurting you, so instead you hurt yourself to punish them. It's an interesting idea. Like I remember reading, there was some psychiatrist sort of riffing on this idea, and he said something like, these people who engage in self-harm, they say, it's not about hurting others, it's about hurting myself. I want to punish myself for something. And the psychiatrist, writing under an anonymous or pseudonymous name, said, why not try some math homework instead? You want to punish yourself. Why don't you teach yourself how to code? Why do you have to cut yourself and send a signal to others? Like, look how badly you've hurt me, that I have to hurt myself because of how poorly you've mistreated me. And there's a research, I think his name is Edward Hagen, who talks about depression as this unconscious strategy to elicit support. And so depression is essentially this response that I need help. I need someone to help me, and the only way I can communicate to you how badly I'm suffering is to just sort of withdraw, to behave in this very sort of low mood, expressive, kind of like I can't do anything way. And the idea is to hopefully like elicit support from others around you. And then they like a very straightforward example he gives is like postpartum depression of, you give birth and then you're depressed. And what you're really trying to do unconsciously is elicit support from people around you to help you raise this baby, so that you're not alone in this challenge.
That's such a great, and you know what I like about that so much is it shows why depression even and is so adaptive. It's like really forming a function. And if people can read their emotions, like when you're angry, it's like there's a problem you need to address.
Yeah.
When you're sad, it's like you need support. When you're
emotions
anxious,
are information.
It's information. And like it's telling you something often that your conscious mind isn't tuned into. It's like I didn't, it's like it, especially when it comes out wrong or it's excessive or something.
Emotions are information. I never heard that before. That's fascinating. Where does that come from?
Well, in social psychology, it's there's this idea, the affect as information hypothesis, which is the way that you feel is it's feedback about your place in the social world and your position in the hierarchy and the state of your relationships. And so each one of the suite of emotions that we have, they evolved for a specific purpose to help us to survive and to get along. And so when I say emotions are, because most people they hear affect and it's kind of jargony in the realm of psychology, but emotions is a more straightforward, accessible word.
Yeah, and they tell you things about other people and your relationships and what's working and what's not working and what you like and what you don't like, and they're incredibly useful.
And some of them it's very obvious, right? Like I spent a lot of time in grad school studying disgust, the emotion of disgust, and the evolutionary benefits of disgust are very obvious. It's to protect your body from contaminants. And so, once you hear that, it's very obvious. But then for the other emotions like anger, I think we talked about anger before in a previous episode about how it's often pathologized. There's something wrong with feeling angry. You should never feel anger. But right. Anger also tells you something about the way you're feeling about someone else, and maybe will give you some information about how to resolve the conflict. Sadness as well. The evolution of tears. Tears evolved. The current sort of state of thinking about why we have tears. It used to be maybe tears discharge some chemical that helps you to feel better. It's discharging these toxic chemicals that are burdening you and weighing you down. Now seems very little to no evidence that that's true. So the latest idea is that tears are essentially social signals, that I'm in such pain, either physical pain or emotional pain, that I need to elicit the help of those around me. And then a way to do this is to discharge this water from my eyes. That it's a very costly, hard to fake signal that I am in serious trouble and I need someone to help me.
Okay, but what if you're like me and you only cry in private?
So you're a weird one. Most people actually, they're more likely to cry. Most people are more likely to cry around loved ones. And so, people are unlikely to cry around strangers. In fact, we often try to stifle our tears around strangers.
Right.
But then once we're around people who we believe have some investment and stake in our well-being, so a spouse or a parent or a loved one or something, then we're much more likely to express ourselves with tears.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, which isn't cry alone too.
I saw a study, I couldn't pull it up, that I remember from grad school, that the most common reason, and I think it was particularly women, I don't know why I remember it that way, but the most common reason for why they cried was anger.
Huh.
It was like it was one of the most common reasons was crying when they're, as a way of expressing anger.
Is that feels sort of evolutionarily adaptive, like to keep yourself from getting hurt, like you're signaling that you're vulnerable, so you don't so somebody doesn't interpret your anger as a fighting words or something. Maybe
that's interesting.
Or you need to back off, or because you're hurting me.
I mean, it can be
or...
manipulative. That's white woman tears, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Seriously, like that, like oh, it's armor. Like as long as I'm crying, you can't accuse me of anything, or I'm not.
I'm the one being harmed here. And so
exactly.
Yeah. Well, so remember, the purpose of anger, though, is to bargain for better treatment. So anger is intended either to inflict costs or withhold benefits to get the other person to recalibrate how they're treating you. And so to me, it makes sense. Like if you're a man, you're going to yell and bluster and be angry and subcommunicate, like, oh, I can inflict costs on you of some kind. Whereas for women, it's much more risky, that kind of strategy. So it's more so to cry and to show, I'm so hurt by this, I'm so sad, I can't inflict costs, so I'll withhold benefits and maybe do like the silent treatment or something like that.
Okay, but what is it when you're angry at somebody, if somebody has wronged you, but your instinct is to just blame yourself for letting it happen? Like this is something that I do. And it's just like I can't. It's like maybe I can't invest enough in the other person to even like allow myself to be angry at them. So I just get mad at myself for putting myself in that situation, or
well, like it's also
allowing it to occur.
Well, the allowing it to occur thing also, it makes it like you're in control of it. Like it gives you control because you did it, as opposed to it's not in my control. Other people just do this sometimes, and I can't predict when it's going to happen necessarily, which is like worse of a feeling, I think. Like it's like a more upsetting to kind of like, you never know when somebody might do something like this. And there's no real way to protect yourself, and that it'd be better if I did it, because then I can make sure it doesn't happen again.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think Megan is disproving one of Freud's most infamous claims that women don't have superegos.
Oh, I'm a bad woman though. This is I don't know. Freud thinks women don't have superegos at all. Wow.
I mean, I don't know that.
He made this claim before, and people subsequently have looked at his other writing and tried to suggest actually he didn't really mean this, or it was a thought experiment, or he was because he didn't elaborate on it, but he did make this claim at one point.
He thought they were all id and ego.
And I think he didn't believe like women had sort of an internal moral structure, like they required like external guidance to like behave properly or something, whereas men did have like an internal conscience that could guide their behavior even in the absence of sort of a legal structure.
So it's like women are like children in that. No, seriously.
I mean, that was kind of how
infantilizing.
It was the Victorian era.
Well, the superego is related to your parents, in particular your father, where you have these desires you can't express. So your way of doing that is kind of like identifying with the father and internalizing those rules about what you can and can't do to contain those feelings. So women don't have the same type of Oedipus complex, so they don't need to internalize the same type of. But there's like kind of like, and maybe Freud did say a ton of crazy stuff, so I'm not like, but I did. But there's maybe a lighter, a diet way of saying this, but like men and women do have different experiences of morality, which I don't know, like, it does kind of resonate with me that maybe men are more, this is stereotype, but that men are more rule based and women are more flexible about what is acceptable or not based on the relational context of
that sounds very counter to what we see in the culture, though. I mean, look at all the Karens. They are the women. Yeah. Like in a contemporary example would be the purity police, and it's women who are kind of. I mean, this is my whole theory is that women control cancel culture. I think 90% of kind of cancellation events, social deaths are spearheaded by women to some degree.
But maybe that's kind of it, because with cancel culture, there's no coherent rule framework for cancel culture. Isn't it a bit chaotic and like unpredictable? Like certain people get super harsh treatment and other people get passes. There's no real rules that are ever proposed if this is what you're supposed. Like, it's all amorphous.
In fact, if you have to ask. That means you're the problem.
Yeah, exactly. But it's a power. It's a power structure, though, right? So there has been this hierarchy established. So whoever has the most social capital or power is the most culpable. I mean, this is sort of the framework that we've been dealing with for the last decade or so. But I'm curious, Andrew. We're going to talk about this piece you had in the Wall Street Journal. Was it a couple of years ago now, about the superego and cancel culture? So, like, what is your theory as to how these two things coalesce?
That there's kind of a really dysregulated. I mean, especially. I mean, I think I wrote it. Maybe that came out 2021 or 2022. So maybe it was a while ago. But at that moment, there was this split, I thought, between how criminals were treated. Maybe there was kind of like abolish prisons, abolish the police, this type of thing. And if you don't prosecute people for stealing less than $1,000 or whatever, and there's this kind of incredible lack of moral clarity about crimes, even violent crimes. And then somebody tells a joke that they don't like, and they should have their entire life be ruined and socially ostracized forever, and there's no pathway to redemption at all. And I do think there was something broadly about the moment there, and I still think it is a strain of culture. It's still around, but it was like hyper moralistic and just mirrored the craziness of a super active but unbalanced superego, where it's like inhibiting, judging, shaming, controlling, regulating, and striving for a kind of unattainable moral perfection that is like, and my thought with this was like, and from experience, I think people I've known who were really in deep on the social justice movement seem to be suffering a lot. I actually have a lot of empathy for them, like crushed under so many moral inhibitions that tie themselves in knots that they strain to. They're actually suffering under the thing that they're actually trying to impose under others. And there's often a lot of self-hatred and torment, and that just mirrored the type of clinical things you'd see with like a really unbalanced and harsh superego.
Okay.
You're nodding like you've seen people who are like that, who like have like the kind of the social justice activist who's like, I don't know if tormented is too harsh of a word.
I think they are racist, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Like, this is a huge generalization. I think that, there's an internal shame. I mean, this was always my theory about Robin DiAngelo, like I found it interesting. If you read about her life, she grew up, she was this not even working class, like very poor. She's an Italian background. I mean, I think like her family was just like, in pretty dire straits. If I'm probably not remembering this entirely correctly, but and she'll talk about how her entire self-concept is of a white person that is superior to people of color. But it just seems to me that she grew up so poor that this was like the only way of getting through. Like she was such a downtrodden person who happened to be white that the only way to kind of organize herself so her ego would be intact was to see herself as higher than black people, for instance. And so that is how her racism was formed. And so she's just reenacting. She is projecting her own internal racism onto everybody else. I mean, that's just my pet theory from having read a very long profile of her in the New York Times several years ago, but it seems kind of obvious.
I think we read this. It was either that one or another back when she was, all over
at her height,
media.
yes.
The height of her popularity. There was some weird anecdote about her. Like, it was a very almost creepy thing about how she talked about how she was oddly fixated on black women's hair. And I thought that it feels racist, like, for her to say something like that and have and publicly talk about this strange preoccupation. Andrew and I a while ago, we talked about the idea of sort of left-wing racism being a form of projection. But I also wondered if it was also this form of projective identification of, because they have to disavow their own racism, they do their best to elicit that racism in you so that they can sort of, channel and express that racism through you having those feelings, but not having to own or acknowledge them within themselves. And I think weirdly, I remember on Twitter, kind of the peak of the riots of 2020, a lot of the conservative influencer types were like, oh, look at the smash and grabs and so on and so forth, and saying what you would expect them to say of oh, the country's falling apart. But then the left-wing activists were sharing it gleefully too, but in a different kind of way of we're finally reclaiming capitalism or something like that. And they were sharing this. But almost like they were inviting people to comment on the fact that a lot of the people who were involved in these riots and smash and grabs were young black people or whatever. And I'm like, why are you sharing this with such excitement and glee when it kind of makes your side look bad? But I wondered if it was it was them trying to elicit something in the audience.
It definitely there's some weird quirks of the quote unquote anti-racist literature in academia and around. And I remember one that is a trope that whiteness is like a drug that you're addicted to because it feels so good, but you can't stop doing it.
You're born addicted to it. You're born with it in your system. You're born
addicted to it, and it's they're just it's what are you talking about? I've never had that but they write about it, and they do play in these tropes they that paint black people as totally ineffectual and not able to do anything.
The removal of agency.
And math is racist, and having criminal law is racist, and they do. There is something really interesting about that. How much they provoke a backlash. If you were going to look just empirically at this stuff, has it persuaded people? Has this improved things? It seems to me so clear that it does the opposite. It sparked a rise in white nationalism, I think unmistakably.
Yes.
So it does fit that they're gratified by creating that.
So are you saying that the social justice left is more inherently racist than the conservative right? I guess that's a redundancy. The political right, the right wing.
The far right and the far left have a lot in common that really mutually reinforces each other.
Yes, it's the horseshoes there.
But it's not just the horseshoe. It's a feedback loop. They're playing off. They're enhancing each other. They need each other. They kind of love each other. And they reinforce some of the same ideals that I think the rest of the country doesn't adhere to. That like race is everything. They're more authoritarian, and they kind of spark each other's anger and intensify their worldviews. They definitely, and they suck the rest of us into it. Like I think the middle is kind of getting split, and more pressure to go towards one of those sides.
Well, yeah, and the algorithm loves them. I mean, they're the ones that you hear, the extremes on either side. And I think this is getting worse. I mean, particularly in terms of like the media landscape. I mean, you look at who does well on YouTube and even increasingly on Substack. It's these very extreme partisan opinions. And I think the people in the center are getting squeezed out. But yeah, I always said the far left and the far right, I mean, that would solve the fertility crisis, right? The population crisis. They should just have a big like hate fuck, and then the population would explode, right? With some very well-adjusted offspring.
I'm thinking about sort of the expressions, because often, and I'm not talking necessarily about the far left, but just progressive people who would never. Well, it's also this interesting thing because also we've heard like everyone is implicitly racist. I mean, you guys remember that, right? Like, oh, we all harbor these hidden racist impulses within us. And then you have to go pay for a workshop or something to exercise these demons. But it was weird because like at the same time they were telling us we were all racist, if anyone actually uttered a racist thought, then they had to be canceled. But it's like they're just saying the thing that you say that all of us have within us anyway. They're just more honest, right? So that was a weird sort of Kafka trap. But I remember reading this very funny study. This was out of Yale a few years ago, which these researchers looked at the linguistic complexity of Democratic versus Republican politicians when they're speaking with primarily white versus primarily non-white audiences. And unsurprisingly, because we see the code switching with Gavin Newsom and so on. But for Republicans, regardless of the audience demographic, they spoke the same way. The complexity of their speech was the same regardless of who they were speaking to. For Democratic politicians, they dramatically simplified their speaking patterns when they were speaking with primarily non-white audiences versus white. So they were dumbing themselves down.
I see that. No, go ahead. But I see that where they're like raise their voice an octave, and it's like they're talking to an infant. Like it has that like it's so condescending.
Just like you, man. I got a 960 SAT.
Oh
and so the other it was in the same paper, another set of studies where they looked at person-to-person interaction, sort of ordinary people in conversation, and they looked at again sort of the linguistic complexity of self-identified white conservatives versus self-identified white liberals. Again, white conservatives, regardless of whether they were speaking to a fellow white person or a black person, they spoke the same way. For white liberals, when they spoke with a black person, they spoke in a more simplified manner than when they spoke with a white person. And probably a lot of this is unconscious, but it is like this weird expression of like, oh, like you're not smart enough for me to communicate with you the way I do with others.
It could be related to hypervigilance about being perceived as they're so conscious about they want to police their unconscious for any sign of bias, and they're hypervigilant about it, and it leads to weird misattuned interpersonal behavior, whereas the people who aren't thinking about that, who are just talking to you like a person, end up coming across as a lot less racist because they're not totally internally preoccupied with like, oh, what if I accidentally say the wrong word? And then it's, it's like impossible to live up to these standards where you're, I don't know, every gesture and word choice is micro-analyzed as proof that you're a white supremacist. And it's just like, how can you interact with people under that system?
I've talked about this on other podcasts, but I mean, do you feel like, I hate to put it this way, but I've talked about this before. Like, do you feel like you're more trepidatious about interacting with, like, say, a black person than you were 15 years ago? Because you're so aware of this dynamic, and you think, oh, they might just assume that I'm racist, so I need to bend over backwards to prove that I'm not. And then it just gets weird, or maybe you even avoid the whole interaction? I hate to say.
Yeah. I definitely. I don't think my personal timeline matches up with culture at all because I was exposed to all of this stuff when I was in college, and I do think I got very messed up about it at that time.
And what
I think,
would that have been? What not to
I was
reveal
in
your age, but what period?
2003 to 2007.
Okay.
So not before this really broke nationally. It was on college campuses, and I saw this, and it was like you'd go to the conference, they'd be like, no more white people can talk in this can ask questions at this conference. That
At
sort
that
of thing.
The
time,
progressive stack.
really? In the early 2000s, in the early to mid
2006, 2005.
Wow.
Yeah. It's been around for a while, and I think what it did actually was it kind of inoculated me to when this stuff came on the scene majorly later. Like I'd seen it all before, and so I'd had time to process it and have an immune system about it and not kind of get sucked into it the same way. Not saying self-consciousness doesn't intrude on my interactions with people of other races from time to time, but I don't think I kind of decided not to buy into it as a therapist, like even like as a person, but as a therapist. I remember like one of the places that I trained at early on was a place where almost all the patients were Afro-Caribbean. There's a neighborhood in Brooklyn, and I was just like, I'm not doing any of this stuff. I'm just going to be a therapist and engage with them in a real way. And it went great. And I just totally rejected everything that I was. So I kind of like, I think I do, not that I don't fall into that from time to time, but I actually work to not fall into those traps of hypervigilance, because I do think it's a trap.
Sure.
But I like personally, it's like it is easy to overthink everything and to be worried about all this stuff, and it's like, I don't know, you can't interact with somebody under that.
A lot of it is a class thing, and like where this person is culturally positioned, because I would think like an Afro-Caribbean person, a kind of working class kind of person in Brooklyn, probably the population you were working with, is different than somebody who is like clearly coded as a social justice oriented person of color. Like that sort of person immediately, like I feel like I'm on alert.
Yes.
And I become very conscious, and then it's almost like you get a form of Tourette's. It's like you're so worried about what you're gonna say. Like, I'm not gonna say this.
It's the N word.
I'm not talking about the N. No, I'm not talking about the N word, but just something that like anything. Like, I don't want to give any possibility of seeming racist in any way, because this person must be looking for it. This person sees me and is waiting for me to say something that could be misinterpreted, and so and then in trying to avoid, like, it's nuts. Like, it's just like if somebody's behind, like if I'm going through a door, I can't, maybe we should not, please don't clip this, okay? Keep this in a huge context. But if I'm like walking through a door, and going into a store or something, and there's a person behind me, I'm gonna potentially be extra aware of holding the door or not appearing to like close the door in their face if it's somebody of any race, well, or particularly a not white person who I think might be offended by me on some level. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think there is like I've said a lot, I'll double down on it. The racial issues in particular, but I think sometimes some other identity politics issues are the issues people are the most dysregulated by. Like really, really, really cannot hold it together. And I got to stop talking about this. I feel like I talk about it too much, but the issue of anti-white racial aggression as being a topic that we cannot ever talk about as a society is the clearest indication of why. Why couldn't we say racial aggression towards anybody of any race is wrong? It also happens against white people, and that's bad too. And we don't have the maturity, I think the psychological maturity as a society to have that conversation. We feel like if we talk about that problem, we're white supremacists, so we can't talk about it. And there's like craziness of our inability to talk candidly about so many issues because we're so dysregulated.
Yeah, well, it's like we can't talk about misandry. We can't talk about, being anti-male because it's a power structure that would be That would be
Betraying
that's punching
the
up.
cause.
It's punching up, but it's also like you can't
punching up,
complain
yeah.
about anti-whiteness because white people are on top, so you must be punching up. But of course, that in and of itself is to assume that they're above you is a form of racism. So you've actually it's such a
it splits everything. It kind of says power is binary. You either have it 100% or don't, 0. And based on that, you either only say good things and only care about them, or never care about them and never it's like there's something where it's like no. Like power is fluid. There's a spectrum. Sometimes people have more or less based on a variety of different things, and it matters always about it's so. There's a real immaturity to that framing of more power, less power, all or nothing. You can only care. You can't care about a group if they're this or that. It's like, it's so. I think it's. This is. I'll get in trouble with this, but I think it's very primitive. It's psychologically primitive, and
it's tribal and
it's tribal.
It's splitting, right?
Savage.
Is that the mechanism splitting, good and bad?
Wait,
yes.
now, Rob, you're not white, so is this alienating you? This exchange?
No, I'm. My
having,
23andMe says I'm 28.5% Spanish, but I think among certain segments of the hereditarian right, I don't know if they consider Spaniards as white.
Yeah.
In the same way, there's the debate: are Italians white, are Jews white, or whatever? But yeah, I do not present as white. I don't really have any. So what you said earlier, Megan, was spot on about the class. So if I'm just out in regular life interacting with a black person, I feel like no hangups at all. But if I'm giving a talk on a college campus and a young black woman raises her hand and I can tell she's probably well, she's on a college campus, so almost certainly she's on
at
the left.
Your event,
but then is
so
she? But then then there's that part. And then is she one of the hate listeners, or is she a fan? What? And then I get a little bit in my head about it, but then I end up, I don't know for sure, but I think I end up speaking like I normally would anyway. Maybe I'm slightly more careful. And I also notice there's a gender dynamic too. If it's a man, I feel far less stressed out about it versus a woman, because then I don't want to be accused of not only are you racist, but you're sexist and you hate women. And so there's a gender dynamic there that can get uncomfortable. But I've actually never had a tense moment with anyone of any race for racial reasons. It's usually if there is any conflict, it's about ideas. But no, I've been brainwashed a little by white liberals. So for example, I was on Coleman Hughes's podcast a couple of years ago when I was promoting my book, and he on the podcast said I grew up upper middle class, pretty good life.
We should say just Coleman is a young black intellectual in case our audience has.
Who doesn't know Coleman Hughes?
He's
a world famous intellect.
No one would assume. Yeah. So anyway, Coleman is yes. Okay.
And so he was interviewing me, and this is the podcast is available everywhere. And he said, I grew up upper middle class, pretty good life, this, that, and the other. And yet, because we were talking about sort of the racial dynamics of this, he said, but people would say that I'm more oppressed than you, meaning me, Rob Henderson, because I'm black and you're Asian, Latino, mixed race guy. And in the sort of the progressive hierarchy of victimhood, I'm, more oppressed than you, even though objectively my life has been better than yours. And in my mind, my impulse was to kind of contradict him. Could it really have been worse than your life? Because I got brainwashed into thinking no one could have had a harder life than, a young black man in America.
Have you ever been to Montclair, New Jersey, Rob?
I've never been. No, I
haven't.
Oh, I could have, yeah. But I've also had this, this exact same, a black man telling me that my life was harder than his. This has happened multiple times, and each time I always feel this need to say either downplay oh, I wasn't so bad, or oh no, yours had to have been harder. I never felt that before college, but it was through the process of being enculturated or indoctrinated into higher education that race determines how hard your life is, rather than the objective circumstances of whatever you went through. And yet that too feels racist. Who am I to tell these people how hard or not hard their lives are? That's actually in some ways more racist, that impulse, than to just let them speak their mind.
And when you say college, were you in the military before college? So So that this would have been later. So in the military, you didn't experience this anxiety at all.
Oh, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, interesting.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
It shows how counter effective all of these things are. Like I'm always shocked that with these ideas, the social justice ideas about race and gender, that the people who promote them don't seem more curious about the empirical outcomes of actually teaching their ideas. They often they're not even trying to do the research. I'm sure some people do to varying degrees, but it's so clear to me that it's contrary to the stated. It does the opposite of the stated goals. It increases tension, it increases paranoia, it increases all kinds of negative aggression, all these negative dynamics.
Yeah.
Incurious really is the word, because when I think about what's happened to people in my world, journalists, writers, people who got into this field because they were interested in ideas and they were counterintuitive and they wanted to have conversations that surprised them, that is totally shut down, and just the utter incuriousness about what's really going on.
Yeah.
It just astonishes me daily. I don't know. It's like, why I say this all the time. It's like, why are you in the job? Why not like it pays very well, like the only upside is to have interesting, exchanges with people.
Yeah.
And like, what are you doing? I don't,
It's the same for therapists. I mean, if you somebody comes in and you're like, oh, you're black, therefore your experience is oppression. I don't need to learn about it, whether or not that's true. And it could be the opposite. Their experience is totally different from what you're assuming. People are so complex, and that's not even a salient. There's a lot of black people where that's not not even the top 5 most salient parts of their identity. And you just but I think it does kind of kill curiosity.
There's a cognitive scientist, Pascal Boyer, who says theory is information for free. And what he means by this is that once you have your theory, your framework in place, you don't have to learn anything new. So if you're a Marxist, you go into a society. Okay, well, who are the capitalists? Who are the workers? Who's this? Okay, now I know how things run. I don't have to actually learn about your culture, the history of your society, what people think about this. Like, I already know what's going on here. And I think there's something similar with the kind of the racial politics, identity politics of, I don't have to learn about you as a human being. I already know everything there is because I can see what race you are and what gender you are and your sexual orientation and everything else. And now I don't have to know anything about your idiosyncratic personal experiences or what you think about the world. If you try to contradict my theory, I'll tell you that you have false consciousness and that you don't actually understand your own oppression because my framework outweighs your own sort of personal view of yourself and your life. I wanted so that piece you wrote, Andrew, you mentioned, you said it 2021 or 2022. You wrote it, so it was published at least in 2022. And so it was a very interesting glimpse to what was happening a few years ago. But then you also, it was oddly prescient because you essentially, so you say here that when the superego bears down too heavily, eventually this overpressurization of moralism intensifies, the desire of the masses erupt, and then the monstrous id emerges to topple the monstrous ego. This response is unlikely to be well organized. Well, to me, this is the re-election of Trump in 2024, and then this weird thing with all of the influencers and Nick Fuentes and Clavicular and all of this weird stuff happening on the online right. It was tamped down during the height of social media censorship, the craziness of 2020 and 2021. Everyone was so scared, and now you're just seeing people Kanye West releases a song called Heil Hitler. Really weird shit happened since then. And I think this maybe under this idea this was a reaction, this backlash to the overbearing superego.
Yeah, totally. And my metaphor didn't make its way into the article. I didn't write it up, but it was kind of if there's somebody that's just constantly scolding you about recycling, your recycling's wrong, you've got to do this, and you just want to dump your trash on their lawn and just light it on fire or whatever. It's that's not even something that you want to do necessarily before. It's just a reaction to just all of the shaming and inhibition and guilting that you want to just do the opposite and just make it as ugly as it can be, because it's so frustrating and so
I mean, you want to own the other side. I mean, everything is own the libs. I mean, there's no coherent like ideology really on either side. Certainly on the extremes. It's just hating the other side.
There is kind of, I think, especially on the extremes on the far right and the far left, there is a kind of like id versus super ego. Like as much as there are similarities, there is a kind of like id versus super ego thing. Like I think there is a real shaming, over-regulated, over-inhibited culture on the left, and I think the right does have more of an aggressive, outward-going energy that feels more id-based to me.
Isn't that weird? Because it used to be the other way around. It used to be the left that was that way, and
that
the right
was more id, and the right was more.
The right was more buttoned up.
Yeah. Like moral majority kind of thing. Religious conservatism. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, this is relevant to your piece and relevant to our conversation. So I noticed that you two both have PhDs, so you are technically doctors, but I noticed in the sign off of the piece, they called you Mr. Hearts. And I can tell you that the biggest Twitter pile-on I have ever received in my life was when I made a joke about it was something like, people who are, unless you were a medical doctor, do not call yourself doctor, and that means you, Dr. Jill Biden. I'm talking about you. And it was like, of course, I think it was like summer of 2020, so there you go. But it was like a total throwaway. I didn't think about it. I should have been doing other things instead of tweeting. But it unleashed are you looking it up right now, Rob? You're going to humiliate me.
No. I'm looking.
It unleashed a torrent of invective, and like they were going to come after me, and how dare you? And it very quickly, here's what's interesting, it very quickly devolved into a racial outcry. And there were a lot of,
So one white woman kind of mocking another white woman becomes racism.
There were a lot of, especially black women with PhDs or EDDs or doctorates of some sort that were deeply, deeply invested in this for obvious reasons in many cases. And they were seeing like a white girl, dismissing this, and it immediately became a racial thing. Now, this was the summer of 2020. But I don't know. I thought it was, it is, you must have a certain degree of privilege in order to just kind of brush off your PhD like it's nothing, and I don't need to hold it so close to my chest. I mean, that's a bit of a flex. So I can see the logic there. But anyway, I wonder how you feel about being called Mr. Hearts and Mr. Henderson.
Well, I didn't get a say in it, just sad, and I don't get any credit for it. That's just their style guide. I thought it was the Wall Street Journal in particular, maybe the editorial page in particular, that called Dr. Jill Biden Mrs. And that was no. Did it happen there?
So I'm looking this because I remember this controversy now that we're speaking about it. So this, I think he's a columnist, or at least a contributor, Joseph Epstein.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So he wrote a Wall Street Journal opinion piece
yes.
called "Is there a doctor in the house?" ? Not if you need an MD. And then the subhead is Jill Biden should think about dropping the honorific, which feels fraudulent, even comic. And then I think so he kind of got canceled as a result of that. And
that was
he
after
got
my
dragged
tweet, because
all
this was
over.
A few years after.
Yeah. So this was December of 2020 when this piece was published. But I remember all of the because I remember I was in grad school and I was like, I kind of want to make some sarcastic remark about this, but I think I ended up just saying something like the only people who should be called doctor is Dr. Jill Biden and Dr. Phil. No one else deserves the honorific. But yeah, that was that whole. I'm surprised, Megan. That must have been a weird experience for you because I'm misreading your mind here, but I would think well, I'm a white woman and she's a white woman, and that's fair game to a little friendly teasing or whatever.
It immediately went off of it went away from Jill. And then into it became kind of a racial thing. But it's funny because I have had conversations with some of my normie friends, kind of boomer types, and they just said, Megan, I think she should have her. Dr. Jill Biden, let her have it.
Let her have it. It's so condescending.
And it just but it is a sort of what's it to you? I mean, this is something that my super ego wrestles with all the time. It's like, Megan, why do you care? Literally, like, move on. Like, but it's like everything that I sort of just chew on all day, you could easily make the case for just, like, let's think about more important things.
I think it's a condescending double standard, because, like, if a man had an ED and, like, he just went around insisting everyone call him doctor, I think everyone would be like, this guy's kind of a loser. Like, he's got to chill out about his credential. But when it's a woman, it's like, oh, she earned it. Like, let's applaud her. Like, hold women up. Like, it feels like overcompensating. Like you're trying too hard to make her, to like flatter her or something.
I think that, but I'm trying to think if there are examples of men who insist on going by doctor.
No. If I meet a man in person and he calls himself doctor and he's not either a physician or a clinician of some sort, like I'll just keep calling him by his first name and, like, ignore the request. I just think it's so silly. And it doesn't really bother me. Like, what is it? Yeah, I don't know. There are other ways, I think, to derive your self-esteem.
It does, like, to me, the main thing that it's hitting is just what we were starting the podcast with, which was, like, how incredibly petty these judgments are. It just doesn't, I just don't particularly, I mean, I don't know. People are just so reactive to something to get angry about, where it's like, I don't know. It just seems like, no. And then it's like, and then, but it does seem to accompany, like, an inability to care about really important stuff. Like, I wonder how many of the people that were so upset about Joe Biden were fine with Claudine Gay's plagiarism or something, or like, it's like, it's probably the same crowd, really.
You know who always went by doctor was Dr. Bill Cosby. Dr. Cosby is what people in the writer's room even had to call him, because he had an EDD. I don't even know. I don't think it was an honorary EDD. I think he might have actually sort of gotten it. But I know people who worked on his show and in various creative capacities with him, and it was always Dr. Cosby, Dr. Cosby.
That feels like to me it's similar to when people insist it's Dr. Martin Luther King.
Well,
Jr.
I was about to tweet that in my defense, and I stopped. So,
well, what's funny is I remember when I was in elementary school, Martin Luther King Jr. It was like 50-50. Sometimes he was the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And sometimes he was Dr. King. And now people just drop the Reverend altogether because we no longer confer status to being a religious leader, but we still do for educational credentials. And so Dr. King, doctor is more important than being a Reverend. But I remember, there was a book by Tyler Cowen where he's discussing whether, like, authors include the PhD after their name on the book cover of their books. And Tyler Cowen, he's an economist. He runs the Marginal Revolution blog, and he writes, if a book lists PhD after the author's name, be wary. The author needs those letters to signal his importance. Usually it means the author is not used to interacting with peers, is appealing to the gullible, or is making questionable claims. Stephen Hawking does not use those three letters. And I think there's something to this that I also am trying to, like, be fair here, that, if you get your degree from, like, a very there's a version of this where, like, people who go to Harvard said, I went to college up in Boston. Like, they're trying to, like, be like,
because
like,
it's going to be so overwhelming in the conversation in the moment. Like, I'm going to be knocked over. So
they're like downplaying it. They're counter signaling. They're trying to, like, bury this, which ends up backfiring anyway. But I think there's a version of this too for PhDs where, like, if you get your degree from, like, a pretty good institution, you're not so hung up on being called doctor, versus, like, if you get one from so there was this woman who wrote a memoir a couple of years ago called Sociopath, and her name was, like, Patrick Gagny, PhD. And then I read a piece about this where, like, she got her PhD from some, like, online degree mill that doesn't exist anymore. But she was very careful to place those three letters on her next to her name, whereas, like, people I know who've got, like, real PhDs aren't like, oh, I got to put the PhD on the cover of my book.
Right. I bet the exception, well, maybe not the exception, but I think I've heard, although you would know because I've never written a book, but that publishers like psychologists to have the PhD if they're especially if they're writing a psychology thing, and maybe that is to appeal to the gullible.
Well, it's a pop
but
psychology
they,
kind of thing.
Well, so I get what you're saying, but then like, so like the psychologist that I like to, like, I don't see it, like, but then I'm thinking like people like Steven Pinker, right? But he's also Steven Pinker, so maybe there's no need for him to use the letters. But then other psychologists that I like to read, they don't use the honorifics either. So,
but I think if somebody's doing a kind of like pop sort of wellness, self-help sort of thing that's like kind of fundamentally not that serious, they're going to want to stick that on there so there's a balance of seriousness. I mean, this is a marketing thing. I can just imagine this. But yeah, they need to. Yeah, especially if you're trying to reach a general audience, and you need to signal that this is an expert. That would be one way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I just, I couldn't imagine. I couldn't imagine doing it. It would feel too cringe. But again, like, I think, there are contexts where it does make sense. Like if it were like a clinical psychologist or a physician, and like you're writing about that particular topic, then I think it could make sense. But otherwise, it just feels like you're trying too hard.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, we should wrap up. Any final thoughts about the superego? I feel like there's more to discuss here because I'm in an abusive relationship with my superego, I think.
I think a ton of people are. And it's like it's a difficult it's a real battle to tame it. But it's like I think the biggest thing, there's a rational thing of like it's usually doesn't make you better at what you're doing. It often makes you worse. And what it's saying is often not true. If you actually like write it down and look at it the next day, you'll see like people often realize like, 90% of this stuff isn't even accurate. But like, I think the reasons why people are attracted to it are really interesting because even when people rationally recognize it's not like a super harsh, super ego or internal critical voice is not really helpful to them, they still, it's hard to let it go. There's something that where people get attached to it. It makes you feel like you or something. I don't know. It's
it's my companion.
Yeah.
Maybe we should come up for the next one. I mean, I think there's more to say in the superego, but maybe we could just concentrate on the whole tripartite structure. Like superego, ego, id, and and just discuss that for the next one.
Oh, that would be really good. I've got a good reading for that too. Should we? Maybe I'll tell you after, so we can surprise them.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. Thanks, everybody, and we will see you next time.
Thanks.